All right. Hello and good morning, everyone. This is Erin Neinhauser with the Pennsylvania Health Access Network. We're so excited that you could join us today for this really important webinar on immigrant eligibility for health insurance. We're going to give people about another minute to log in and get settled before we get started, but I just wanted to cover a few housekeeping notes before we got into the meat of today's presentation. So first of all, everyone that registered will get a copy of the slides. We're also recording this session today, and we'll post it at our site for organizations working on outreach and enrollment, which is www.paenrollmentpartners.org. And I sent that to everyone in a chat message, so you can just click on that link, and we'll have that posted by the end of the day, along with the supplemental materials, the slides, and the recording for today. We did max out at 100. That's all we have space for in these sessions. So if you have colleagues that wanted to register or join us and weren't able to, please let them know that all the materials, including the recording, will be available for anyone to access after the fact. Let me see here. If there's any other housekeeping notes I'm forgetting. You can raise your hand on the GoToWebinar control panel to ask a question, or just type your question into the question box on the control panel. We want to hold questions until the end because Mary Pat and Lydia are going to cover some really great information, and they'll probably answer a lot of the questions that we'll get early on. So please write your questions down so you don't forget them, but we're going to hold questions until both Mary Pat and Lydia are finished with their presentation, and we're very lucky to have a full hour and a half with them today. So we won't be rushed. We'll have plenty of time to get to all of your questions, which is very exciting. So with that, let me tell you a little bit about our presenters today and then turn it over to them. Mary Pat Pileggi joined Community Legal Services in 2007 as a staff attorney in their public benefits unit. She works with clients to resolve problems that arise in many different government benefit programs, but she's a tremendous expert in Medicaid eligibility and issues arising for immigrants and refugees, and we're very excited to have Mary Pat with us. And also her colleague, Lydia Gospel. Lydia is an Independence Foundation Fellow and staff attorney in the Public Benefits and Energy Unit at Community Legal Services, and she actually has worked as a healthcare advocate prior to her becoming an attorney at Families USA and a community organizer at Citizen Action of New York. So both Mary Pat and Lydia have an excellent wealth of experience that they're bringing to us here today. We're very excited to have them. And with that, Mary Pat, I'm going to turn it over to you and also hand off control. Okay. Okay.
Okay. So does that mean I have control now? I'm not sure.
You do. Okay. And then I think just over on the left there where it says from start. Yes.
All right.
Okay.
All right. Okay, good. Thank you very much, Erin. So hi, everyone. I'm really excited that we have so many people joining today. Real quickly, I just wanted to mention that we have another webinar coming up on Tuesday that will discuss some of the more technical details about how immigrants can actually use the health insurance programs that we're going to discuss today, how they can get enrolled, and some tips about how to overcome some of the barriers that immigrants tend to face when trying to enroll and use these health insurance programs. So if you have questions about that, hold on to them hopefully until Tuesday, and hopefully you can join us on Tuesday for that webinar. Here we go. So this is what we're going to talk about today. We're first going to talk about immigration status generally and talk about some ways that you all can figure out what your client's status is. That's always the first and sometimes really troubling step when trying to help immigrants connect with healthcare. Then we're going to talk about within that broad world of immigration status, and it's a vast one. We're going to try to narrow it down and talk about the categories of immigration status that are relevant when we start to think about which immigrants are eligible for which health insurance programs. And then after that, we'll get into more of the nitty-gritty about the health insurance programs themselves and which immigrants are eligible for which programs, including medical assistance, CHIP, and the marketplace. And then, as Erin said, we'll save some time at the end to answer your questions, and hopefully we'll have time to get to all of them. So starting off with just some general information about some common terms that you all might have heard, just to go through and define some of the more common ones. Starting with refugees. Refugees are a very specific type of individual that come to the United States from another country. They are typically leaving their country because they fear for their own life or safety, or that of their family, or their government cannot or will not protect them from serious human rights abuses. And they enter the U.S. with that refugee status. So they're designated as refugees outside of the U.S., and when they arrive here, they are already known to the United States government as refugees. Asylum seekers are very similar to refugees. They come here for many of the same reasons. The big difference is that they don't get that refugee status before entering the United States. So they come to the U.S., and then when they get here, they file claims for refugee status. If those claims are accepted, they are granted asylum and they become asylees. Immigrants come here seeking permanent residence in the United States and are generally on a path to United States citizenship. They generally receive their status through family petitions or petitions filed by their employers. There are some lucky winners of the diversity lottery. I think there are about 50,000 immigrants a year who are the lucky winners of the immigration lottery. And then there are the humanitarian immigrants like asylees and refugees who adjust to become immigrants. So once a refugee arrives here with a refugee status, they can become an immigrant. They can become a lawful permanent resident and get on that path towards U.S. citizenship. Non-immigrants are other folks who come here for some usually time-limited stay. Visitors and students are the main groups of people who we think of when we think of non-immigrants. But there are also people like people with U visas. That's a pretty well-known visa that's out there. U visas are granted to folks who are usually in the United States undocumented and are victims of usually a violent crime. And as long as they are participating in prosecution of that crime, they can be granted a U visa to stay in the United States and then eventually become lawful permanent residents and U.S. citizens. So there are lots of non-immigrants out there, lots of folks out there with some status that allows them to stay in the United States for some usually temporary or finite period of time. And then the term undocumented, which lots of folks are familiar with. And it's not just for folks who crossed at the border without a document. It's also for those folks who enter the United States with some status that has now expired. So anyone who's entered the U.S. either without inspection at all, or who were inspected upon entering the United States, but now the status that they had, maybe a visitor's visa or a student visa, has now expired. They are undocumented. So how do you figure out what status your client has? This is not always as easy as asking your client, what is your immigration status? If anybody who's worked with immigrants knows that sometimes people don't understand that question. They're confused about their status. And understandably, immigration is a very confusing world. And it takes a long time to get status. And when people are applying, they're not really clear about what their status is while they're in that application process. Realize, looking at this slide, that there should probably be a slide before this, just about how to talk with immigrants about status. It can be scary for immigrants to talk about status, and we'll talk about this a little bit more on Tuesday, but I think it's important for people to understand that when you're talking with an immigrant about their status, often you need to provide some reassurance that the conversation is private, that when they do reveal, if they are revealing their immigration status to you, it's going to go on an application somewhere for health insurance, that revelation of their status won't result in negative consequences with immigration officials. They won't be deported. If they are applying for health insurance and they're undocumented, there's no reason why they should have to put that they're undocumented on the application. So just some general kind of preliminary conversation that's useful to have with immigrants so that they can be comfortable telling you as much as they know about what their immigration status is. But then once you're in that conversation and you're in a place where it's difficult to figure out what the status is, some of these questions can be helpful, starting with what is your immigration status, but like I said, that often doesn't get you the answer that you need. And you need to kind of back up and talk with people a little bit about how they came to the U.S. Did they cross at the border, or did they come on an airplane? Did they have a visa when they entered? Did they enter after a family member filed some kind of petition or application for them to come to the United States? Have they received any papers or cards in the mail from the government about their status? Do they have any applications currently pending with the government to change? And last but not least, if you really can't figure it out, you might just have to talk to this person's immigration lawyer, if they have one, to see if that person can help you figure out what the person's status is and where they are in the process. Also, it's really helpful to look at people's papers if they have them. These are just some of the documents that immigrants might have. If they are an immigrant who is now has naturalized to become a United States citizen, they should have their certificate of naturalization. If they're a lawful permanent resident, they should have their green card or their lawful permanent resident card. This is also known as the I-551. If they are they don't have their green card yet, but they have some other status and they are employment authorized, they should have an employment authorization card, also known as the I-765. The I-94 is also known as the arrival and departure record. Any immigrant who's coming into and out of the United States should have an I-94. Any immigrant or non-immigrant or refugee should have an I-94. And that, looking at the I-94 can give you some information about what a person's status is. And then maybe an immigration court order, especially asylees should have an immigration court order granting them asylum if they don't yet have a green card showing that they are asylees. And those are just some examples. And it's always helpful to look at these things. So you all know what you're looking at. This is what the most recent version of the green card or the lawful permanent resident card looks like. This is the front and the back. Circled some of the more pertinent details here that you all might be looking for when you're looking at this card. The first circled number, the USCIS number, is also known as the A number or the alien registration number. And this number is very important for immigrants to have when they're applying for pretty much anything. Like I said, it has three different names: USCIS number, alien registration number, or A number. The category here is important for people when you're trying to figure out what somebody's status is very specifically. So this category code of RE8, I happen to know, is a category code that indicates that this person is a refugee. So this person entered the United States as a refugee and now has her green card. And that's really important to know because refugees, as we'll talk about later, there are no immigration status restrictions for health insurance program for refugees. So this person really should have no immigration status problem. when going to apply for any health insurance program. And then on the back of the card, we see the A number again, but then we also see the card number. And I wanted to point that out for you all, anybody who's out there doing health insurance marketplace enrollment. I know the card number is an important number to have when you're entering, when you're doing marketplace applications and trying to electronically verify somebody's immigration status. It's important to know where the card number is. So this is the most recent version of the green card. It hasn't always looked like this. On this slide at the top is the version of the green card that's right before the most recent one. So you might see folks with this version of the green card too, and you'll see it also has the A number, the category code, and then at the bottom, this number starting with SRC is the card number. The card on the bottom of this slide is the employment authorization card. This is the most recent version, I believe, of the employment authorization card. And you'll see that it also has this pertinent information. We have the A number, the category code, and then the card number, all right next to each other here. And the category codes that they use on employment authorization cards are different than the category codes that they use on the permanent resident cards, just to make things a little more confusing for everyone. So the category codes here mean something different than they might mean on a green card. And I'll talk in a minute about ways to figure out what these category codes mean. This is a naturalization certificate. So if you're dealing with an immigrant who is now a U.S. citizen, they might have one of these. Again, you'll see the USCIS registration number, also known as the A number or the alien registration number. And then at the very top, in the top kind of right-hand corner, is the certificate number. And again, for folks helping people enroll on the marketplace, you need both of those numbers oftentimes when you are trying to verify someone's status as a naturalized U.S. citizen. Then these are I-94s. On the left, we have the electronic I-94s, and on the right, we have the paper I-94. I am used to seeing the paper I-94s, but I understand that all I-94s are now issued electronically. So you all might, if you're working with immigrants, you all might see the electronic I-94 if you help people go online and look for their I-94 information. It will look like what you see on the left here. But people might also be walking into your office with a paper I-94, and so you'll see something that looks like what's on the right. And this tells you a few things. It tells you the class of admission. Here we see B1. That means somebody has a B1. This person has a B1 visa, which I just happen to know is, I believe, a visitor's visa. Actually, I don't know. But it's a visa. It's a temporary visa. And for this person on the right, this visa is going to expire on July 10th, 1993. Right, so it's long expired. For the person on the left, they're admitted until October 10th, 2012, also expired. But you can see, for people with more recent visas, how long their visa will live and when it will expire. And if it's still good, then they have what we'll learn later is a lawfully present status. But if it's expired, they are, as we've already mentioned, undocumented. So this I-94s can provide some good information too. Sorry, I just got lost for a second. I don't know what's going on. All right, sorry. Websites that can help. So these two links at the bottom, the green card category codes and the employment authorization card category codes, we talked about those. So if you are looking at a card, if you have a card in front of you, you can go to these websites and you can look up the category code and figure out what this person's status is, how they entered, how they got their employment authorization. It can really tell you a lot about what a person's actual status is. the top link here, the USCIS Case Status Online. You can go there. If somebody walks into your office with some piece of paper from immigration that you don't really understand, you can sometimes go onto this website, punch in the number on that document, and figure out where this person is in their application process, their immigration application process. You know, so if for example, somebody has walking into your office who's applied for asylum and they have a piece of paper that says that their application for asylum has been received, but they don't know what has happened, if anything, since that application was received, you can go into this website, punch in the information that you have, and sometimes you're able to figure out if the application was approved or denied, or where it is in the process, how long it's been pending. That's all really important information when trying to figure out what somebody's status is and whether they might be eligible for a health insurance program. The Customs and Border Patrol website, this is where those electronic I-94s are. So you can go on there to see somebody's I-94, and you can find out what their visa status is, if it's expired, if it's still good. So as we all know, not every family is made up of people with all the same status. There are lots of folks who have families with people with a variety of statuses. I think the most common one that we all see is undocumented parents with United States citizen children. The important thing to keep in mind is that when you're trying to help some individual enroll in a health insurance program, you need to focus on that individual's immigration status when figuring out whether they might be eligible, which health insurance program they might be eligible for. The status of a United States citizen child's parent has no relevance to his or her eligibility for Medicaid, for example. Kids of United States kids of undocumented parents have as much right to Medicaid as any other U.S. citizen child. Okay, so now that we've kind of talked broadly about the wide world of immigrants and how you might be able to figure out what your client's status actually is, let's talk a little bit about how these immigrants are categorized by the rules governing health insurance eligibility programs, health insurance programs eligibility. So when we're thinking about which immigrants will be eligible for which programs, these are the main groups of people that we think about. First, we think about U.S. citizens. They're the easy ones. And then within the large group of non-U.S. citizens, we have folks who are lawfully present, and this is the broadest category. This is lawfully present is by far captures the most immigrants that are out there. Under that, we have people who are permanently residing under the color of law, or PRUCOL. Within a narrow group are the qualified immigrants, and then outside of that we have everybody else. And we'll talk in some detail about what each of these mean. So United States citizen can mean a few different things. It's not as straightforward as it might sound. It's either someone who was born in the United States, that's the easy one, or it could mean somebody who has derived their citizenship from their parents. So this could be somebody who was born outside of the United States to United States citizen parents. It could also be kids of immigrants who have naturalized. So, and then we have naturalized U.S. citizens. So only some immigrants can, go back to the United States citizen. Only some immigrants can naturalize. Only some immigrants are on a path to United States citizenship. Generally, you have to become a lawful permanent resident. You have to have lawful permanent residency for 5 years, and then you have to take a bunch of tests and the oath to become a United States citizen. And those folks have naturalized. They are naturalized U.S. citizens. An adult who has naturalized and who has kids who are still immigrants and are under the age of 18, those kids can derive their United States citizenship from their naturalized USC parents. So a few different ways for people to become U.S. citizens, but once you're a U.S. citizen, you're a U.S. citizen. For those folks who are not U.S. citizens, we have first those non-U.S. citizens who are lawfully present in the United States. And like I said, this is the broadest category of non-U.S. citizens. It includes pretty much everyone who's here with permission, even if they are only allowed to be here for a short period of time or some finite period of time. These are just some examples of people who are lawfully present. We have non-immigrants. These are people with the tourists and the student visas, but then also those U visas that I mentioned earlier. People with temporary protected status. The Department of Homeland Security will sometimes designate a country as just too dangerous for people to return to. And so if you are here from one of those countries at the time of that designation, then you can be granted temporary protected status, which means you're allowed to stay here for a temporary period of time while conditions in your home country are still bad. So for example, Haitians who were in the United States when the earthquake happened, folks from some West African countries when the Ebola outbreaks were happening were granted temporary protected status. Sometimes temporary protected status is not so temporary. There are people who have been in the United States for decades with temporary protected status, but sometimes it is pretty temporary. It's granted in 18-month increments and is often renewed at the end of those 18 months. People with pending asylum applications. So adults who have been waiting for word on their asylum application for long enough, at least 180 days, so that they can get employment authorization, or kids who have been waiting at least 180 days without employment. Kids don't get employment authorization. So as long as they've been waiting at least 180 days, they are lawfully present. People who have applied to adjust their status to lawful permanent resident status and are just waiting for word on their application for lawful permanent resident status are lawfully present. And then pretty much anybody with employment authorization will be lawfully present. So a very broad range of folks who are lawfully present. There is one, I think, really terrible exception to the definition of lawful presence. So deferred action is a special status that the government grants to people, and it allows them to stay in the United States usually for 2 years, and then after 2 years they renew their status to continue deferred action. It allows them to stay here, allows them to work here, and for all purposes they're here lawfully. But there was a special exception made for individuals granted deferred action through the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program. You might remember these folks. These guys are also known as the Dreamers. Back in 2011, 2012, the Obama administration announced this special program, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, that allows young people who arrived in the United States as children who are undocumented. It allows these young people to apply for deferred action status as long as they are in school or the military or have a high school diploma. They can stay here, they can work here. They are, for all purposes, lawfully present, except for purposes of federal health benefits eligibility. So they are specifically excluded from the definition of lawful presence just for federal Medicaid, CHIP, and marketplace purposes. Proof call. Proof call is a little bit of a tricky one. It's not used so much anymore, but it's still out there and it's still relevant for a very small group of immigrants. It's pretty much anybody who's allowed to be here for some indefinite or permanent period of time. And pretty much anyone who you can call PRU-call, you can also call lawfully present. And there really are just two exceptions to that. So first is the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, the DACA folks. These people are PRU-call. They should be PRU-call, even though they are not. They are explicitly excluded from the definition of lawful presence. They are not excluded from the definition of PRU-call. The other group of people are people with orders of supervision who are not employment authorized. These people are PRU-call, but they are not lawfully present. Orders of supervision, for those of you who are curious about that, there are more folks out there with orders of supervision than you might expect. So these are folks who have actually been ordered, have deportation orders, but the United States government cannot deport them for a variety of reasons. They are people who are subject to deportation, but for practical reasons cannot be deported, and so they continue to live here in the United States under an order of supervision. And what the order of supervision usually says is that they have to report to immigration officials every few months, or six months, twice a year, once a year. It depends on the person, but they have to report to immigration officials and say, yes, I'm still here. I'm still, I'm working, and I'm still living within this order of supervision. So these people are not lawfully present, but they are PRU-call. And it's just one little thing to keep in mind as we think about the health insurance programs that are available to those folks. Qualified immigrants. The term qualified immigrant is very specifically defined in federal law, and it includes lawful permanent residents, so people with green cards, certain battered spouses and children of United States citizens, or lawful permanent residents who have applied for status through the Violence Against Women Act, or VAWA. We refer to these folks as VAWA petitioners. There's a sizable group of VAWA petitioners out there. One of the things that the Violence Against Women Act did was it allowed immigrants who are eligible to become lawful permanent residents through their United States citizen or lawful permanent resident spouse to apply separately from that spouse when the spouse becomes abusive, right? So that these people do not have to endure abuse in order to obtain the immigration status that they're otherwise eligible to receive. So once this individual has applied through VAWA for this special path towards lawful permanent residency, they become a VAWA petitioner and they are qualified. People paroled into the U.S. for at least 1 year. This is a very small group of people. You're unlikely to see them. And then humanitarian immigrants. Humanitarian immigrants are a relatively large group. They include refugees, asylees, who we've already talked about, Cuban and Haitian entrants. The way this term is defined in the law makes it so that pretty much every Cuban is a humanitarian immigrant, and almost no Haitian is a humanitarian immigrant. So if you're working with Cubans, keep in mind that it is very likely that they are a humanitarian immigrant and thus qualified. T visa holders, these are folks who were victims of human trafficking. And then people granted withholding of deportation or withholding of removal. This is also a relatively small group of people. Withholding of removal is a special status that's very similar to asylum status. Usually people just get asylum if they're going to get asylum, but some people will have withholding of removal. And then we have everyone else. And now that we have lawful presence is so broad and includes so many people who are here lawfully. That everyone else pretty much only applies to people who are undocumented or people who had some status that has now expired. Unfortunately, it also includes the DACA folks because they have been specially excluded from the definition of lawful presence. But for the most part, when we're talking about everyone else, we're talking about people who are undocumented. So this is my attempt to kind of put this, to make a visual representation in the hopes that it would make it all easier for people to digest. So like I said, lawful presence is the broadest category that we have. And it pretty much eats up the whole world of immigrants when we're thinking about which immigrants fall into which of these categories. Humanitarian is the most narrow. But you'll see that everyone who is qualified and everyone who is a humanitarian immigrant is also lawfully present. And almost everyone who is crew call is also lawfully present. And there's just this one little sliver of crew call that doesn't also overlap with lawful presence, and that's the DACA and the people with the orders of supervision without employment authorization. And then outside of all that world of people who might potentially be eligible for health insurance programs we're going to talk about are the undocumented folks who are in their own little bubble, unfortunately. So hopefully that's helpful to get people thinking about the different relevant categories of immigrants when thinking about eligibility for health insurance programs. And I'll turn it over to Lydia to talk more about eligibility.
Hi, everyone. So Mary Pat did a really great job of outlining really complicated immigration scheme, and understanding who's in what category is really critical to understanding what type of health insurance people can get. So we're going to go through who's eligible for what, and we're going to go through medical assistance, CHIP, and the marketplace. So we'll start with medical assistance. And on this slide, you'll see that we have, too soon. We have outlined the different categories of medical assistance in Pennsylvania, and we've separated it into federally funded medical assistance and state-funded medical assistance. That distinction is really important when we're talking about immigrants, and we'll get to that later. But so the federally funded programs we'll talk about are Healthy Horizons, MAUD, and MAGI medical assistance, and then state-funded. We have general assistance-related medical assistance and medically needy only. So we'll start with the federally funded programs. You may be familiar with these. Healthy Horizons is a disability-related program, and before we had the Medicaid expansion, this is how we got a lot of people health insurance. To qualify for Healthy Horizons, you have to be disabled for at least 12 months, or you have to be 65 or older. Okay, and you show disability using a PA 1663 or an employability assessment form that we'll talk about a little later. Healthy Horizons also has an income limit and an asset test. The income limit is 100% of the federal poverty level, which is, I believe, $981 for one person, a little over $1,300 for two people. But it's really important to note that the way that income is calculated in this program is that if your income is from work, from employment, there's a 50% disregard. So if you're considering somebody for this program, you want to make sure to only count 50% of earned income. And there's also an asset test of $2,000 for an individual and $3,000 for a couple. MAUD is medical assistance for workers with disabilities. It's also a disability-related category, similar to Healthy Horizons, but in addition to being disabled, you must also be working. And the requirement for work is minimal. You don't have to be working very much, and you don't have to be getting paid very much. I think it's an hour a week for $5 an hour. So keep this in mind for people who may be over income for Healthy Horizons. The limit here is 250% of the federal poverty level. And again, there's a 50% earned income disregard. This category is really helpful for people who have a little bit higher income but are able to work even just a small job, such as helping a neighbor with groceries, watching the neighbor's kids, or that sort of thing. With MAUD, you do have to pay a monthly premium that's calculated at 5% of income. And then there's MAGI medical assistance. So many of you are probably familiar with the term MAGI. It stands for Modified Adjusted Gross Income, and it reflects a different way of calculating income. The categories that are calculated under MAGI are children, and depending on the age of the child, the income limit will change. It's generally for kids 6 to 18, it's 138% of poverty, and for smaller kids, it gets up to 220% of poverty. Pregnant women, also 220% of poverty. And then we have the big chunk of Medicaid expansion adults in this category. And their income limit is 138% of the federal poverty level, and that's about $1,354 for an individual. There's no asset test in this category, so that's really important to consider as well. So immigrant eligibility for federally funded medical assistance programs. Who's eligible to get into those categories? Lawfully present immigrants who are pregnant or children under the age of 21. So if you can visualize Mary Pat's sort of image there with the bubble of lawfully present, so you want to think, is this person lawfully present? If so, if they're pregnant, child under 21, they can get this insurance. Humanitarian immigrants or refugees, the asylees we discussed, can also get this insurance. Qualified immigrants who have been here for at least 5 years, and qualified immigrants who are exempt from the 5-year bar can also get this insurance. So that 5-year number is really, really important when you're thinking about immigrants. Many of you have probably heard of the 5-year bar, and this applies to federally funded medical assistance programs, which is why we've sort of split the categories up between federal and state. Some qualified immigrants must wait 5 years after obtaining their qualified status before they're able to get federally funded medical assistance. This is known as the 5-year bar. However, there are many qualified immigrants who are exempt from the 5-year bar. So when you have an immigrant who's here lawfully, who has a qualified status, you really want to look and first ask whether they can get health insurance right away or whether they have to wait for 5 years. So who is exempt? Humanitarian immigrants, kids under the age of 21, and pregnant women, as we discussed. Those folks can get health insurance in a federally funded category right away. Folks who have been here continuously in the United States since 1996 can also get health insurance right away. So somebody just got their qualified status, but they've been here continuously since 96. You want to think about applying for federally funded medical assistance right away. So who's left? Who has to wait 5 years after they get their qualified status to get federally funded MA? These are people who entered on family-based or employment-based petitions, lottery winners, VAWA petitioners. These are a lot of the folks that we see. So this is an important slide. You want to think about where people fit in and what insurance you're going to help them apply for. So what other options are available? We get to state-funded medical assistance programs. General assistance-related medical assistance, also known as GAMA. It's called General Assistance Medical Assistance because when the General Assistance Program did exist, it was the medical assistance that kind of went with it. When GA was terminated, the Medical Assistance Program remained, so we still have this title, GAMA. The folks who can get health insurance in this program are folks with disabilities, folks caring for a child, people in drug and alcohol rehab, or domestic violence victims. Now, after the Medicaid expansion this year, the only people who are really left in this category are very low-income immigrants, because all of those other folks, if they qualified for this category, now they qualify for Medicaid expansion. So the only people we're really seeing who are getting GAMA are immigrants who can't get a federally funded program. As you can see, the income limits are extremely low for this category. $205 a month for one person, $316 for a couple. Again, very low asset limits. So the people who are getting this insurance have to have next to nothing in income. And the immigrants we see who are getting this insurance a lot are sort of elderly immigrants who've come over recently. They're 5-year barred, they're living with their adult children, they have no income, they have health issues, so they can qualify as having a disability and having very low income and get into this category. It's a very underutilized category. I think sometimes people forget it exists because it is extremely narrow, but it's always something to think about when you're working with immigrants. There's also MNO, which is also a very narrow category. It's virtually only available for people who are age 59 or older. The income limits are slightly higher at $2,550 over 6 months for one person, and a little higher for two. So you can think about this for folks who are older as well, who have a little bit more income. So the people who are eligible for state-funded medical assistance are qualified immigrants subject to the 5-year bar. So people who are in that 5-year waiting period. Lawfully present folks who are not qualified and also not pregnant or a child under 21. Okay, so you don't have to be qualified to get this insurance, but you do have to be lawfully present. We also have PRU calls under here. If you recall from Mary Pat's presentation, most PRU calls will also be lawfully present and fit into sort of that second bullet, but then there's those other two categories, the DACA and the folks who have orders of supervision. All of those people, if they meet the other eligibility requirements of state-funded MA, should be able to get that insurance. So remember, you have to show disability to get GAMA, and you also have to have extremely low income. If someone is eligible for this insurance, they do get the full medical assistance package. However, it is in fee-for-service. This category, it used to be in managed care. When Healthy PA came along, these folks got switched into fee-for-service, which means they use an access card rather than having Health Partners or United Healthcare or something like that. They just have their access card. We are working on getting these folks back into managed care plans, but it's not happened yet. And the reason this is important to note is that the networks are narrower for people who only have the access card. Providers who take managed care medical assistance do not have to take access card medical assistance. So it's just a matter of finding providers who take the access card. There's also another important rule to note, that if you have an immigrant who's getting the state-funded medical assistance and their disability form, is checked off that the disability will last 12 months or more, that also qualifies them for food stamps. And there is a 5-year bar for food stamps, just like there is for medical assistance. However, if folks are getting medical assistance, which state-funded medical assistance is, in a disability-related category, so they're getting that GA-MA, they have the employability assessment form for 12 months or more, they can also get food stamps. It's a little-known rule, and if you are having trouble getting your client on food stamps, you can give us a call, but this is something you should really think about utilizing for your GA-MA folks. So whose immigration status restricts eligibility? Undocumented, people who did not, as Mary Pat discussed, enter illegally, or maybe they had a visa that they overstayed. And then adults who are not pregnant and who are lawfully present but not qualified and don't meet the eligibility requirements for state-funded MA. So these are your lawfully present folks that, they make more money, they have higher income than the state-funded MA limit, or they're not disabled. And also the PRU-call folks who also are ineligible for state MA. And the qualified individuals who've been here for less than 5 years, they're in their 5-year waiting period, and they don't meet the eligibility requirements for state-funded MA. So those are the folks who are going to be a little bit stuck when it comes to getting medical assistance. For them, you want to consider whether they might be eligible for emergency medical assistance. Emergency medical assistance, by showing that you're eligible for emergency medical assistance, you can get over the immigration hurdle to the other medical assistance categories. So that means that as long as you can show that you're eligible for emergency medical assistance, which we'll discuss the requirements, then as long as you're eligible for another category, you can get health insurance in that category. But showing that you're eligible for emergency medical assistance is extremely hard. It is a very limited category. Applicants must have a serious medical condition and an urgent need for care. It used to be that more folks could get this health insurance, but over the last several years, Harrisburg has really restricted who's able to get emergency medical assistance. So in order to get emergency medical assistance, you have to have an emergency medical condition. So what is an emergency medical condition? We have the definition up here. It's a condition that manifests itself with acute, with acute symptoms of sufficient severity, including severe pain, so that the absence of immediate medical attention could reasonably be expected to result in one of the following: placing the patient's health in serious jeopardy, serious impairment to bodily functions, and serious dysfunction of a bodily organ or part. So the definition itself sort of outlines that in order to get this insurance, you have to sort of be at risk. Your health has to be at risk or be placed into serious jeopardy. So what does that mean? How do you show that somebody's meeting that definition? You have to meet 3 elements. You have to have a medical condition. It could be physical or mental, and the condition itself can be ongoing. The symptoms must be acute. So you must be, this condition that you have must be manifesting itself with acute symptoms. and the doctors in Harrisburg who are responsible for making the decisions about who gets emergency medical assistance and who doesn't get emergency medical assistance are very focused on this word acute. They want to see that there are sort of sudden and intense symptoms from your condition, and that you need a specific treatment to ameliorate them. There must also be a reasonable expectation of future serious health consequences in the absence of immediate treatment. So we italicize future here because the health consequences don't have to already have happened. You don't have to be coming to be applying for this health insurance after the fact, after you've already ended up in the hospital, or after you've had surgery or something like that. If you have a condition for which in the future it could cause serious health consequences, that is sufficient under the definition if you meet the other requirements to get emergency medical assistance. This slide has the things that are not required. This is important because I think there are some misconceptions around emergency medical assistance by both people who help people apply and also by some people who are reviewing applications and by some people who work in the county assistance offices. You don't have to have been in the emergency room. You don't need to be in the emergency room, and you don't need care in a hospital setting to get emergency medical assistance. As I was saying, it's very difficult for folks to get this insurance. A lot of people who are applying for this insurance are undocumented, and so as all of these decisions are being made by doctors in Harrisburg, there are some bad attitudes towards immigrants when it comes to making decisions about this health insurance, and so a lot of times folks need advocates because they'll want to see whether somebody was in the emergency room, which is helpful in applying to get this insurance, but it's not required. We've listed some emergency medical conditions that DHS has said they will, approve coverage for, like dialysis, high-risk pregnancy, cancer. It's much easier to get emergency medical assistance for surgical procedures, broken bones, labor and delivery. These are all things that should qualify somebody for emergency medical assistance. DHS likes to approve emergency medical assistance for sort of discrete, urgent needs. So if if your client needs surgery next week, or they're going to lose some bodily function or impair their health, then that is a very good emergency medical assistance case. However, those are not the only cases that are approved, and under the law, those are not the only cases that should be approved. So I'm just giving you sort of background of the ones that are easier to get approved because ongoing conditions or conditions that aren't so clear that somebody has cancer or so clear that somebody needs surgery are going to be a lot harder to get approved, and you might want to consult with one of us or another legal aid organization about how to go about doing that. You're going to need to submit an emergency medical condition form that's required, and you also need to submit medical records and letters from doctors. We can't emphasize enough how important medical proof of a condition is. These are doctors who are making these decisions in Harrisburg, and they want to see paper. So if it's possible to get a note from a doctor, that's extremely helpful for getting these cases approved, and you'll also want to submit medical records. So you'll want to work with your clients to get this information to build the best case you can for emergency medical assistance. This is the emergency medical condition form. As you can see, it has a place for the diagnosis. It also has a place for the treatment needed. This is something that the doctor will fill out and will sign. As you can see, there's also a place for treatment dates. Some folks who are ineligible for other insurance programs and are only their only chance of getting coverage is EMA, who have conditions that may be borderline in terms of getting approved, and sometimes it's hard for doctors to decide, you know, what to put down in terms of dates of treatment. What if there is no end date of treatment? You know, I had a client who had a seizure disorder. A seizure disorder was just going to be ongoing. When working with doctors, it's helpful to put begin and end dates as much as possible, because in Harrisburg they're going to want to see that this is a treatment that has a beginning and an end, and that, you know, can sort of, this person needs to be treated and then it'll be fine. That may not be the case, but it's helpful to do that where possible. And it's also extremely helpful to have some really specific treatment that's needed. So, so again, your clients will be working with their providers to get these filled out. Earlier we talked about disability-related categories where applicants will have to prove disability in order to obtain insurance. We talked about Healthy Horizons, MOD, and we also talked about GA-related MA as the categories where you're going to have to show disability. To do that, applicants will use the PA 1663. This form needs to be signed by a medical provider. And I should have said this earlier also with the EMC form. It doesn't have to be a doctor. I work with nurse practitioners all the time who sign these forms. So eligibility will end on the expected end date listed on the form. This is really important because, as we'll see in a minute when we look at the form, you have to put a beginning and an end date. And at the end date, you either need to get a new form or your eligibility is going to end, because you're only going to be eligible while you have a disability. And for Healthy Horizons, the disability must be 12 months or more. And also, if you recall, for 5-year barred folks who are getting GA-MA, for them to also get food stamps, their disability also has to last for 12 months or more. So we almost, you know, always advise people to get the 12 months or more EAFs if they can, because that enables them to get Healthy Horizons. It enables them to not have to get a new form in the near future, which is helpful for people to maintain their medical assistance. This form is a little funky. Maybe many of you have worked with it in the past. It's called the Employability Assessment Form. So sometimes healthcare providers get very nervous about filling this out, because if they think that if they're putting somebody down as disabled, that they're saying that they are not employable. Because as you'll see on the right, sort of there's these 4 boxes: permanently disabled, temporarily disabled for 12 months or more, temporarily disabled for less than 12 months, and then employable. So sometimes healthcare providers think that if they don't fill out employable, they're saying that this person is not employable. That is not true. The form is set up in a really confusing way. And one of the reasons we know it's absolutely not true is because in order to get MOD, medical assistance for workers with disabilities, you have to get this form filled out. And that is a program for people who are actually working. You also have to be working. So it's helpful to explain to providers and explain to your clients that filling out number 2 here, temporarily disabled for 12 months or more, is not saying that the person can't work for 12 months or more. It's just saying that the health issues are going to last for 12 months or more. And then, as you can see, the healthcare provider has to put in dates. And sometimes providers don't want to put in a year because they think that their patient won't come back for a year. And so the only reason they're putting down 3 months is because they want their patient to come back and see them in 3 months. So sometimes you have to explain to providers, that's really good and nice, but you know, you're not doing them any favors by only putting 3 months. And sometimes it's just people, healthcare providers just don't know. So this form is less important for folks who are getting federally funded medical assistance because you don't need it for Medicaid expansion, but it's still important for getting GA-MA and, of course, Healthy Horizons. So it's still in play. Immigrant eligibility for CHIP, lawfully present kids, if they meet the other eligibility requirements from CHIP, can get CHIP, and the folks who are not lawfully present, undocumented and DACA, cannot get CHIP. So lawfully present, again, is the broadest category. So most kids, you know, you see, unless they're undocumented and DACA, should be able to get CHIP if they meet the other eligibility requirements. So now we'll talk about the marketplace, which is also very important. And I'm going to go through this a little bit quickly so we can get to questions. But all lawfully present immigrants can purchase insurance on the marketplace. Okay, so there's no 5-year bar. So that big circle in Mary Pat's chart, those folks can all get marketplace insurance. Immigrants who are not lawfully present, this is the undocumented and the DACA folks, cannot purchase health insurance on the marketplace. So they, regardless of whether they can get subsidies, they can't buy insurance at all. But those folks are also exempt from the mandate and are not subject to the tax penalty. So, so qualified and lawfully present immigrants from 138 to 400% of federal poverty are eligible for premium tax credits. So folks above 138, again, can get tax credits just like everyone else if they're qualified and lawfully present. And similar, they can also get cost sharing reductions up to 250% of poverty level, just like everyone else if they're qualified or lawfully present. But the special rule comes in for folks who are under 138% of federal poverty level. The marketplace is available and subsidies are available for immigrants who are not eligible for federally funded MA and they're qualified or lawfully present. So as we discussed, there's a lot of lawfully present immigrants and there's many qualified immigrants who are not able to get federally funded in May because they're waiting in their 5-year waiting period or because they're not qualified. These folks can buy insurance on the marketplace and they can get subsidies. And I'm sure you've worked with a lot of these folks. There have been some challenges to getting them marketplace insurance, and we're going to talk about a lot of that on the webinar on Tuesday in terms of tips for advocating for these folks who are under 138. So, so they've got some sort of special situations happening. This spreadsheet, this flow chart, Mary Pat created this, and it's very helpful in sort of asking yourself, okay, that was a really complicated webinar. There are a lot of rules about who can get what. Mary Pat created this flow chart so we all can have an easier path to that. So we have this as a handout with the webinar, so you all will have access to this. Mary Pat's been doing this a lot longer than I have, and I will say I've used this flow chart a lot. So I recommend taking a look at it and sort of running through some examples. Say if you start, does the immigrant have any kind of current immigration status? And then you sort of go from there if they do. If they don't, you see you go right to they can only get EMA. So that flowchart will be available for people to download and use. But now I'm going to stop talking so all of you can ask both Mary Pat and I questions.
Okay, thank you so much. That was a ton of great, really great information. So I'm going to check and see. Okay, so we've had questions come in. Okay, so the first one is, do you have any recommendations for getting ongoing coverage for emergency medical assistance for a cancer diagnosis and a patient who needs chemotherapy. This case is in the Berks County Assistance Office, who tends to only do inpatient stays and not ongoing treatment for chemo, despite medical notes and specifics on how long treatment is needed.
Yeah, so that's these EMA cases, like Lydia said, are really difficult. So the Bucks County Assistance Office really shouldn't be doing anything different than what we understand the state rule to be on cancer. And the rule, as we understand it, is that ongoing EMA will be approved for cancer, especially in those cases where something like chemotherapy is needed. What I would say is if you have a connection with somebody within the Bucks County Assistance Office who's handling this application, talk with them about their process. As we understand it, each county assistance office is sending these cases to the doctors in Harrisburg that Lydia mentioned. And if the denial is coming out of Harrisburg, that's a big problem that we would like to know about. If the denial is coming from someone within the Bucks County Assistance Office, then what we can help you do is connect with somebody in Harrisburg who hopefully could help set Bucks County straight on cancer cases. If the application's been pending for a long time or it's been denied, I'd say file an appeal to preserve your client's rights to any of the EMA benefits they might have already missed as they're waiting for Bucks County to make a decision. In terms of medical documents, if you've given them something that says that confirms a cancer diagnosis and an ongoing need for chemotherapy, I can't think of anything else that you could give them to get this approved.
Next question is, can a child on emergency medical assistance get food stamps if they have a disability? And in this case, it's autism.
I guess I'm assuming this is an immigrant child. It really depends on the kid's immigration status. So, like Lydia mentioned, there is a 5-year bar for food stamps. I just want to be clear about the question. So the question is, a disabled child on medical assistance, can that child get food stamps, right?
Yes, on emergency medical assistance.
Oh, emergency medical assistance. If this is a kid getting EMA, then it sounds like they probably have an immigration status that will make them ineligible for food stamps. You got to be qualified in order to get food stamps, even if you're a kid, unfortunately. Quick question, for people eligible for GA-related MA, do they have to have some kind of legal status in order to qualify for GA-MA?
Yes.
Yeah.
You have to be qualified or lawfully present or PRU-call to get GA-MA. So unfortunately, undocumented folks cannot get GA-MA. And you also have to meet the other requirements of GA-MA, the low income limits.
Okay. Question about the 5-year bar. If an immigrant is ineligible for Medicaid because they don't meet the 5-year bar, but they've been continuously present since 1996, how do they go about proving this? What kind of documentation would they need?
That's a really good question. I think maybe I've had like one case like this. I was kind of convinced that maybe these people just aren't really around anymore, and it was more of a relevant group of folks back in the late 90s, early 2000s. For folks who were undocumented in 1996 and have been continuously present, it'll be a bit more of a challenge. And I would guess that you would want to get stuff like maybe employment records if you have them, leases, proof of where you've been living since 1996. The welfare offices see this so infrequently that my gut is that they would, if you put any reasonable package together, maybe with an affidavit from this person explaining what they've been doing since 1996 in the United States, with some documentation to back that up, that would be accepted by the county assistance offices. For people who had some status, there should be a record of, there should be like I-94s showing when they entered the United States. If I-94s also show when people leave the United States, so if there isn't an I-94 showing that somebody left for some significant amount of time, then that could be proof of continuous presence since 1996. But again, I haven't really handled one of these cases, so I'm not entirely sure how the CIO would handle it.
Next question is just a request that you talk a little bit more about employment authorization cards and how they affect eligibility for medical assistance.
So people who are authorized to work, who have employment authorization cards, are almost always going to be lawfully present. And the reason for that is that only people with one of those statuses listed within the lawful presence definition will be eligible to apply for and get employment authorization. So if somebody has an employment authorization card, it's a pretty safe bet that they're also lawfully present. If you think back to Lydia's presentation, people who are lawfully present can get federal Medicaid if they're a kid or a pregnant woman. If they are not a kid or a pregnant woman, they can get state MA if they're otherwise eligible. And if they're not eligible for state MA, they can purchase health insurance on the marketplace with subsidies.
Okay. Next question is a scenario case, so comment on it if you can. If not, maybe we can follow up offline. This question is around a family of 4, 3 of whom just got temporary protected status, 2 parents, and 1 child under 18. The other child is still waiting the protected status. The family monthly gross income is $785. The assister is helping this family apply for an SEP on the marketplace, but is wondering, would the children be eligible for medical assistance with the parents being eligible for marketplace tax credits?
Yeah, so people with TPS are lawfully present. Lawfully present kids are eligible for Medicaid, so the kids should get Medicaid. The parents, assuming mom is not pregnant, will not be able to get federal Medicaid. They might be able to get state MA if they're otherwise eligible. But if not, then they should be able to purchase insurance on the marketplace with subsidies.
Great. Next question is, in Philadelphia, the sister's working with a medically complicated child who's here on a visitor's visa and was only granted emergency Medicaid, which is now expired, and is looking for tips on how to advocate to get this child medical assistance.
So a kid with an yeah, go ahead.
You go ahead. I was just gonna.
So just to be clear, so this is a kid with a visitor's visa who had EMA, but the EMA has now expired, and we're wondering if there's some other way to get her Medicaid, right?
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, so a kid with a visitor's visa is lawfully present. If she's income eligible for Medicaid, and it sounds like she is, if she was getting EMA, then she should be getting just full Medicaid, regular full Medicaid, but not EMA. This rule about lawful presence is often forgot at the county assistance office, and the reason for that is the rule is not made clear really anywhere. There was an operations memorandum that was released back in, I think, 2010. And since then, it hasn't been the rule has not been mentioned again to the people who work at the county assistance offices, so they've forgotten. And they need to do a workaround in their computer system in order to authorize lawfully present kids. So what I do when I'm working with a lawfully present kid, especially somebody like somebody with a visitor's visa, which a visitor's visa is not obvious to anyone at the CAO that it makes this kid have an immigration status that makes him eligible for Medicaid. So what I would do is I would just send the operations memorandum from 2010 directly to the county assistance office and say, here's the rule. This kid is lawfully present. Please give her Medicaid. And I did not include that operations memorandum in our handouts, but we can maybe work to get that to whoever needs it.
Absolutely, yeah. And we had a request too to link to the medical assistance handbook so we can send that and the relevant operations memos along with the slides and the handout. We have 2 other questions that have come in so far. The next one is for GA-related MA. How does someone provide proof of being a domestic violence victim, and would that person still be eligible if they have no income?
Okay, so to prove domestic violence with the welfare office, you can do it a few ways. The easiest way is to use the department's domestic violence verification form. It's a 1-page form. Again, we can send this around to folks. If somebody is experiencing domestic violence and has no income and no assets, I assume, then yeah, it sounds like they would be eligible for GAMA. One thing to keep in mind, though, about the domestic violence category for GAMA is that it's only good for 9 months in a lifetime. So that means if somebody is a DV victim today, and they unfortunately still are 10 months from now, they will no longer be eligible for GAMA after the first 9 months. And once they use up those 9 months, they're cut off forever. So we only use that DV category if we really need to. We have found that most DV victims will also have some kind of health condition that can go on an employability assessment form, and there is no time limit on the disability category. So think about disability for that DV victim first, and if you can't get proof of a disability, then you can use the DV verification form, which we can also send around.
Great. And then the last question that's come in is, does CLS help with getting immigration client status changed, specifically helping someone who's undocumented get permanent residence or other legal status?
No, we don't. Unfortunately, we do not have immigration experts here. There are a number of legal organizations, at least in Philly, that we know of that provide free or reduced cost legal services for immigration help. We have a flyer that lists the names and contact information for the organizations we know, and we're happy to send that around too if that's helpful.
Great. Yeah, I think definitely. So there's no other questions that have come in at this point, so this would be a good place to just sort of see what common challenges people have working with immigrants and refugees. That'll, I think, help inform the next webinar, which is coming up on Tuesday, on troubleshooting immigration-related issues and health coverage. It's also going to be at 11 a.m. For an hour and a half. So I'm just going to launch a poll and see what challenges people are most commonly encountering working with immigrants and refugees. So please take a minute and fill out this poll, and that'll help us, tailor and prepare for Tuesday. And as folks are filling this out, you can also type in more questions. We have about 5 more minutes if there's any last-minute questions. Okay, and the results are coming in right now. Looks like about half of people have voted, so if you haven't yet, please do. So it looks like the challenges are pretty evenly distributed so far. A lot of people are having problems with language barriers, getting information in clients' requested language from the state. A lot of folks also having challenges determining whose income counts and what the household status is when it's a mixed status household. Okay, almost 2/3 of people have voted, so we'll just hold it open a little bit longer, catch any folks that haven't yet. Looks like a lot of people are having challenges with the 5-year bar and proving a client's eligibility for tax credits in the marketplace. And I know you guys are going to focus on that on Tuesday. But I think that's been a big challenge for assisters, is helping someone get their supporting documents in, first getting it from the state to prove that they're not eligible for Medicaid, and then helping them get it into the marketplace so they can keep their tax credit. Okay, looks like almost everyone has voted here. Okay, last call for any input on most common challenges you're seeing as you work with immigrants and refugees. Okay, so I'll just ask one more time if anyone has any final questions before we wrap up today. Okay, so Mary Pat and Lydia, any final thoughts from either of you?
No, I don't think so. Join us on Tuesday if you can.
Absolutely, and so I just want to thank you both again for joining us. This was incredibly informative, and for everyone else, we have a recording of this session, and I'm going to pull together the slides, the materials, the links that we talked about to operations memos and the handbook, and all of that will go out by the end of the day, and feel free to share that with your colleagues who weren't able to register and join us in this session. We'll also include a link to register for Tuesday's session, which will be at 11 a.m. Till 12:30 this coming Tuesday. So thank you everyone so much for joining us, and especially to Mary Pat and Lydia, thank you. This was great.
Thank you.